Howdy, howdy. This is the podcast that talks about all the little creepy crawly things lurking in dark places. My name is Junebug Fugit. Taste the rainbow. Hey, just to give a little update on the happenings that are going on here behind my house on this mountain that I've talked about before. Back on January 4th, I was back here in my little studio room, and I heard what I can only describe as a pterodactyl over across the creek. I heard like a rawr, and a bunch of birds flew out of the bushes and the trees that were back there in that area. I heard like 100 birds. It was kind of weird. And the next day, my son heard some kind of weird scream, he said. It sounded like it was out in the yard. He couldn't really describe it, but he said it was a scream. So there's some kind of weird creature there on that mountain. On Tuesday, January 25th, I was on my way out to my Jeep. I was going down to help my dad with his breakfast and stuff at about 7 a.m. And I was walking up to the Jeep, and I was 6 feet away from it, but I was too lazy to use the key and open the door, so I used the remote entry thing. It makes life a lot simpler. Use the remote control instead of having to stick the key in the hole. And when I did that, whenever I use the remote entry thing like that, it makes the headlights come on the Jeep whenever the doors unlock. And when I unlocked the doors that day on the 25th, just pretty much immediately, as soon as I pushed the unlock button and the headlights kicked on, I heard this roar up on the top of the mountain behind the house. So, yeah, I gotta get up there and check that place out. And, hey, I think I see Jimmy skipping down the hallway. Here's Mr. Haunted with the news.
We come, walk down the street, get the funniest looks from everyone we meet. Hey, we're the monkeys, the people say we're monkeying around, but we're too busy.
Breaking monkey news. Monkeys escape after truck crashes on Pennsylvania highway. A pickup truck with an enclosed trailer full of 100 monkeys collided with a dump truck, the police said. 4 escaped and 1 remains missing. Jamie Labar was working at the front desk at a Super 8 hotel in Montour County, Pennsylvania on Friday when she heard that there had been a crash on the highway nearby. I thought it was just another car accident, because there are always accidents there. Oh no. But it was not just another accident. The Pennsylvania State Police said that a pickup truck with an enclosed trailer full of 100 monkeys had collided with a dump truck and that 4 of the monkeys had escaped. The cynomolgus monkeys, which are often used in scientific research and can cost up to $10,000 each, had been on their way to a lab in Florida when the crash happened at about 3:20 p.m. on Route 54. 150 miles northwest of Philadelphia. No people were hurt, but troopers and state wildlife officials responded as the search for the monkeys intensified into the evening hours. A state police helicopter was also put on standby, but had not been deployed for aerial reconnaissance. Trooper Lauren Lesher, a state police spokeswoman, said. Thanks, Lauren Lesher. As of Saturday morning, only 1 monkey was unaccounted for. Anyone who sees or locates the monkey is asked not to approach, attempt to catch, or come in contact with the monkey. Cynomolgus monkeys were in high demand for coronavirus vaccine research at the beginning of the pandemic, so much, in fact, that some scientists are talking about the need to create a strategic monkey reserve, an emergency stockpile similar to those maintained by the U.S. government for oil and grain. I want to see a stockpile of little monkeys. With their reddish-brown coats and pink whiskered faces, the monkeys, also known as crab-eating or long-tailed macaques, are known for using their hands to grab food from burrows and can live up to 30 years in captivity. Miss Labar also said that when her friend told her that the monkeys had escaped after the crash, she assumed it was a joke. Then she began to worry. She said, at the thought of the monkeys scampering in traffic and trying to stay warm. Temperatures in Montour County were expected to plunge near zero on Friday night. I hope someone gets them out of the cold, whoever it is. Maybe that someone could be her. And that's your breaking monkey news. Back to In Dark Places.
We come, walk down the street, get the funniest looks from everyone we meet.
You know, I got a bad feeling about that, because Pennsylvania is pretty much the Sasquatch capital of America. There's tons of Sasquatch reports out of Pennsylvania. So I got a bad feeling about that little monkey running around with all those Sasquatches. Those guys are going to get together and start some kind of world domination thing or something. Last week on the show, we took a little road trip into the unknown and explored the state of Illinois. While we were researching that show, I ran across a UFO story that kind of jogged my memory. There was a mass UFO sighting in Highland, Illinois back in 2000 that was seen in several towns and hundreds of eyewitnesses. And the more I read about this story, it started kind of clicking in my mind. My old buddy Mark Corbin told me about this story.
There was multicolored lights on this object, and it was seen over a wide area. There was actually 5 police jurisdictions that were involved. They actually tried to triangulate these objects. There was apparently two objects, and they was trying to triangulate, and I guess they couldn't get a fix on them because it kept moving so much. It would appear be in one spot and then appear in another spot.
Mark was right there at the beginning with me and Kyle Levering when we created the Appalachian UFO Research Society. And sadly, he passed away in 2013. He was just 46 years old. I still think about Mark all the time. He was a walking encyclopedia of UFO events. He could pinpoint every date. I was super jealous of that. Miss you, buddy. It's pretty neat that he's still here helping me out with the podcast. I was going to read this story on last week's episode because we were talking all about Illinois, but the more I read into it, the more I realized it should be worthy of its own show. Something very strange visited southwestern Illinois on January 5th, 2000, but what it was remains a mystery to this day. The first person to notice anything strange during the early morning hours of that day was Melvern Noel, the owner of a miniature golf course in Highland. During the winter months, Noel worked as a truck driver, making deliveries at all hours of the day and night. He was just returning from a delivery at around 4 a.m., and before returning home, he decided to make a quick stop at his miniature golf course, just to make sure everything was in order during the off-season. He parked his truck in the back of the building, and as he climbed out, he looked up and noticed what he thought was a bright star in the northeastern sky. He didn't give it much thought at the time and went into the building. After a few minutes inside, he left and locked the door behind him. As he walked back to the truck, he again noticed the bright light. This time, he stopped and looked at it more closely. It was then that he realized that the star was actually moving in his general direction. As he watched it, he began to realize that the light was part of a much bigger object. It looked like a giant rectangle in the sky that was roughly the size of a football field. It was very tall and had a set of windows that ran down the side. There were 2 floors with windows that emitted a very bright light, Noel saw, and as the object got closer, he also spotted a number of dim red lights on the bottom. The entire object was black or dark gray in color, and he later described the thing as a 2-story house in the sky. Noel watched it as it moved silently across the sky, and as it passed to the northwest, he also spotted more windows across the back of the object. As the ship passed over him, Noel realized that it was moving much slower than a conventional aircraft, and it certainly did not look like one. The entire sighting lasted almost 5 minutes. As the object vanished from sight, Noel promptly climbed into his truck and drove to the Highland police station. He was sure that no one would believe him, but he hoped that whoever was on duty might be open-minded enough to at least contact a neighboring town's police department and see if the strange object in the sky could be verified. The dispatcher in Highland was skeptical of Noel's account, but because he did appear to be a rational guy, he agreed to put a call into the police in Lebanon and asked them to be on the lookout for anything unusual. Officer Ed Barton received the call in Lebanon at around 4:15 a.m. Not surprisingly, he was dubious of the report and first asked the dispatcher if he was joking. When he was assured that it was a serious call, he drove to the north end of town, past Horner Park, and onto Whitacus Road. He saw absolutely nothing out of the ordinary, but followed the road as it turned to the north and east toward Illinois Route 4. A short distance along this road, Officer Barton looked up and saw two large, brilliant white lights in the sky. Curious, he now began to drive a little faster. When he arrived at Route 4, he turned south and headed back toward Lebanon, watching the lights from his driver's side window as he sped along. At some point, he stated that the two lights seemed to merge into one as he turned on his overhead emergency lights. Convinced now that the lights in the sky were part of a low-flying aircraft that was experiencing mechanical problems. The more that Barton drove, the more he started to notice details about what he was observing. He first noted that one of what he thought was a round light was actually somewhat long and cigar-shaped. He also saw that the object was not really moving, but sitting stationary in the sky above the neighboring town of Summerfield. A few moments later, it began to move again, this time in his direction, and Barton stopped his car. He turned off his lights and then turned off his car radio in order to hear any sound that the craft might be making. As far as he could tell, though, it was completely silent. As the dark shape got closer, he could make out more details. It appeared to be a massive, elongated, narrow triangle, and at each corner he could see a bright white light. The lights never wavered in their intensity and appeared to be pointing straight down. They did not light up the ground, but they were, as Barton noted, still very bright. Amidst them, he saw a smaller red light that was flashing. The ship moved closer and closer, and the officer realized that all of the sky above him had now been blotted out by the shape. Even at this close distance, which he guessed at no more than 1,000 feet from the ground, the object made no noise. He continued to watch it as it turned in a southwesterly direction, never banking like a normal aircraft would, but rotating in the sky, almost remaining completely level. Barton now scrambled for his radio and called in to describe what he was seeing. In between transmissions, he saw the aircraft start to pick up speed and travel away from him. As it did, he saw the back portion of it for the first time and would later describe it as rectangular and illuminated with white light. By the time he finished his last call, he told the dispatcher that he estimated the object was now above the town of Shiloh, about 8 miles to the southwest. At this time, Officer David Martin of the Shiloh Police Department joined in on the sighting and radioed back that he could indeed see something in the sky. He had been driving along the southern end of town when he saw the mysterious object, which he saw moving to the west. Martin saw the 3 brilliant white lights, as well as the flashing red one, before he actually saw the dark mass of the ship's body. He thought the object resembled a wide triangle or an arrowhead, and as he chased after it, he stuck his head out the window to see if he could hear any sounds coming from it. Like the other witnesses, he heard absolutely no sound. Finally, the craft picked up speed and moved out of the area. By this time, the weird radio transmissions were attracting the attention of other officers on early morning duty in surrounding small towns. While a number of officers would eventually be involved in the sighting, one has to wonder how great the numbers may have been if the craft had appeared in the sky over a large Illinois city rather than in a series of sleepy little towns with only a few policemen on duty. One officer who became curious about the affair was Craig Stevens, a cop in nearby Millstad. After hearing the other calls, he drove to the east end of town in an attempt to see this thing in the sky. He drove around for a time, seeing nothing, and then ended up in Lighter Cranks Park on the north end of town. He was looking out the windshield of his squad car when he spotted a large triangular-shaped object in the sky. He described it as moving very slow, and he said that it made no noise except for a low decibel buzzing sound that he could barely hear. As he watched, it moved to the north, and he saw the white lights and the single red light on the bottom. Stevens called his dispatcher to report that he had seen the object, and then grabbed his Polaroid camera and jumped out of the car. He aimed the camera at the object and took a photo. Unfortunately, the cold morning air and the dark of the early morning hours produced only a murky and barely discernible image. Not long after the events that occurred that night became public, the St. Clair County Sheriff's Office released copies of the dispatch tapes from January 5th. The transmissions between the officers and the dispatchers from the various towns make an eerie addition to the story. And after doing a little digging, I was able to find the transcripts of that dispatch call. So, I figured instead of me reading all that in my goofy little voices, that I'd bring a few of my pals in, and we'll have a little dramatization. Hope you enjoy.
Lebanon, this is a call from Highland PD in reference to a truck driver who just stopped in. He said there was a flying object in the area of Lebanon. It looked like a 2-story house. It had white lights and red blinking lights, and it was last seen southwest over Lebanon. Can you check the area?
Did they say the truck driver was DUI or something? 10-4, I'm out. Just a quick question. What if I happen to find what I'm supposed to do with it? If I see it, I'm not saying a word. Also be advised, the last time I went over Lebanon, this was approximately 5 minutes ago, was a military cargo plane. It looked like a C-5. Be advised, there is a very bright white light in the east of town. It looks like it's just east of Summerfield, and it keeps changing colors. I will go over there and see if it looks like an aircraft. It doesn't look like an aircraft, though. It is not the moon, and it's not a star. If you could, will you contact Scott Air Force Base and see if they have any flying in this area, please? Whether it's a plane or not, it's heading westbound now. It would be really close to Scott now. As a matter of fact, if the silo officer looks up, they can probably see it by now.
I reckon I see something, but I don't know what the heck it is. It's probably heading toward Lambert Field.
I've got that object inside also.
Are you serious?
It's huge.
Does it look like, what does it look like to you?
It's kind of V-shaped. It looks like it's possibly headed toward Lambert.
10-4, that's what Shiloh said when it was headed towards Fairview Heights.
Really? Does Dupo have a Polaroid?
That, I don't know.
I'm not sure what you're seeing. It appears to be pretty high in the area. When I could first see it with binoculars, you could see it was different colors. Now it appears to be white.
Is it very large?
It's hard to tell. It's pretty far off.
This object was above me about 500 feet, and it was huge.
This thing appears, it's probably 20 or 30,000. It's where planes usually are. It's not low at all.
I always enjoyed it in school whenever the teacher would assign those little plays and things to like different students and everyone would have their own little part. That was fun. And the DUPO officer, Officer Janney, mentioned in the transmission reports, was the last police official to report seeing the object that morning. After hearing Officer Stevens' radio traffic, he decided to have a look for himself as to whether or not a huge craft was passing over the area. About 5 minutes after Stevens' sighting, the DUPO officer also saw the array of lights over his town. However, he stated that the lights were at a fairly high altitude and were heading to the north and northeast. In fact, they were now so high that he likely would not have noticed them if not for the radio calls that he had been listening to. He watched it through binoculars, but because of the distance, he really couldn't make anything out other than the red and white lights. He could see nothing of its shape or size. And here's the credits for our little dramatization in order of appearance. The dispatcher was played by our very own Mr. Haunted. The Lebanon officer, Officer Barton, was played by my son, Brandon Fugit. The part of Officer Martin was played by Carl Childers from the movie Sling Blade. The part of Officer Stevens was played by my best friend in the whole wide world since the age of 10, Roger. And the part of Officer Janney was played by my friend Goose from over at Here to Chew Bubblegum podcast. I'd like to give a huge thanks to all my buddies who helped out for our little dramatization. We're going to take a little break from the story right now. Here once again is my friend Jimmy Haunted with this week's Cryptid Corner.
This is Mr. Haunted with this week's Cryptid Corner. Shout out to UFO Fred Richards for giving us this week's suggestion. We introduce you to the Hodag. In American folklore, the Hodag is a fearsome critter resembling a large bull-horned carnivore with a row of thick, curved spines down its back. The Hodag was said to be born from the ashes of cremated oxen as the incarnation of the accumulation of abuse the animals had suffered at the hands of their masters. In the heart of the Northwoods near Rhinelander, Wisconsin, lucky visitors may come across a mysterious, mischievous beast known as the Hodag. This legendary creature has roamed the Northwoods for more than a century and has become the official symbol of Rhinelander. According to 1893 news accounts of Eugene Shepard's discovery, the Hodag had the head of a frog, the grinning face of a giant elephant, thick, short legs set off by huge claws, the back of a dinosaur, and a long tail with spears at the end. The Hodag also had green eyes, huge fangs, and two horns sprouting from its temples. The Hodag reportedly breathed fire and smoke and had a pungent smell, which is described as a combination of buzzard meat and skunk perfume. Early reports indicate the Hodag was about 7 feet long, 30 inches tall, and weighed in at about 200 pounds. But as visitors will see in the Hodag statues and murals around the Rhinelander area, the Hodag's exact appearance has been long open to interpretation. Fun fact, was the Hodag on Scooby-Doo? Darn tootin' he was. The Hodag made a cameo on the famous cartoon series in a 2012 episode of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated called Hodag of Horror. In this episode, the Hodag appears as a surprisingly vicious jewel thief, robbing the unsuspecting people of Crystal Cove. Apparently, the Hodag took a little trip to the hometown of Fred, Daphne, Velma, Shaggy, and Scooby, The Scooby-Doo version of the Hodag cuts a sinister appearance, complete with glowing red eyes. And does the Hodag have a country festival? Darn tootin' it does! Tickets for the 44th Hodag Country Festival takes place July 7th to the 10th, 2022. Tickets are on sale now at hodag.com. Orders can be placed anytime by clicking on the Tickets tab above or by calling our office at 715-369-1300 during regular hours. That's this week's Cryptid Corner. Now back to In Dark Places.
Very creepy. Thank you, Jimmy. So now here's some reports that came in after the sighting occurred. This report was filed on the National UFO Reporting Center's website by Officer Barton, who was Brandon in the recreation. After being dispatched to the north side of Lebanon, I saw two large, very bright white lights that changed into one, and then when I got closer, it changed into a cigar shape. Then, when it flew almost directly over me, it was triangular. It made no noise as it flew overhead. I last saw it heading southwest toward Shiloh and advised the dispatcher to let them know. A total of 4 police officers saw this. Myself and the Shiloh, Millstad, and Dupo police departments all are in Illinois. At 4:15 a.m., I was dispatched to the north side of Lebanon, Illinois, in reference to a call received by the St. Clair County Sheriff's Department about an object that was described to be as big as a 2-story house with bright lights flying around the north end of Lebanon. While heading east on Whitacus Road, I saw what looked like 2 big, very bright white lights very close together in a stationary position over the town of Summerfield. I called this in to the dispatcher and advised that I was going over there to check it out. I also told them it definitely wasn't the moon or star. While heading south on Route 4, it changed shape and looked like 2 lights merged into one big one before my eyes. After getting into the town of Lebanon, I turned eastbound onto Route 50. While traveling eastbound, I watched it change into what looked like an elongated cigar. It was to the southeast of me at this time. There were a few cars on the road, so I turned on my overhead emergency lights. I was going approximately 75 to 80 miles per hour while heading in the direction of the object. When I turned onto old Route 50, it started moving slowly northeast. I stopped my squad car, turned off the overhead lights, and turned off the car. It then headed southwest at a very high rate of speed. It looked like it was somewhere around 2,000 feet above the ground. It passed just south of my position, approximately 150 to 200 feet away from me. When I began to tell the dispatcher, it then accelerated and headed southwest toward Shiloh. Before I could finish what I was going to tell the dispatcher, it looked like it was over Shiloh's southeast side. I told the dispatcher that if a Shiloh officer would look up, he would see it. And right after the end of my transmission, Shiloh advised he could see it, and that it was still heading southwest at a high rate of speed. Soon after that, the Millstead officer told the dispatcher that he could see it. The next reporting agency was the Dupo Police Department, who said he was watching it through his field glasses. I couldn't discern what the shape was until it flew almost overhead, and when it did, it looked like a large, narrow triangle, with the sides being longer than the base. It had 3 large, very bright, white lights in what appeared to be the 3 corners. The lights were pointing straight down with no oscillation. There was one red light that blinked near the base, just in front of and in between the large white lights. And when it was moving away from me, the back end looked long and narrow, with white light coming from it. The light looked like it was one long unit. There were multicolored lights spanning the length of the back. I could tell there was more than one color, but not sure which ones because they seem to blend together. The length of observation was approximately 4 to 5 minutes. Also, when it flew past me, it made no noise. And then there was another report that I found on the National UFO Reporting Center from Edwardsville, Illinois. On my way to pick up my children from the sitters, I was heading east on Schwartz Drive in Edwardsville, Illinois. When I got to the corner of Schwartz Road and Brown Street, I saw one large light hovering over some trees. But when I got to the next corner, which was Springer Street, I got a much clearer view. The large light I saw was one of 3. The large light was the top of the triangle. Underneath that was 2 smaller lights. The top light was very bright white, and the other 2 lights were light green, but just as bright as the top light. This display of lights lasted about 45 seconds. I had driven about 2 blocks east on Schwartz Road. The pattern of lights appeared close at first because it seemed to hover over some trees, but when I got to the next corner, I could tell the lights were at a great distance. The brightness made it look closer than it was. I was alone in my car when I observed this. And there was this report out of Lakemore, Illinois. A bright light in the east moving southwest. 2 rows of 3 lights under the craft. High rate of speed. When overhead, a flash of light, and then the craft moved away on its course. Very little sound. A dark shape, but noticeable as an aircraft. That was seen by an Army vet pilot, and he'd never seen that type of aircraft before. It was flying with some air turbulence. Wish he would have provided a better report. And then there was another report from a woman whose family was also caught up in the flap. She said, "We lived in the country near Walshville, Illinois, and were driving in town when we noticed something following us that looked like a star. It followed us from our house to almost into Litchfield. Once we noticed this thing was following us, and it was so huge, we actually pulled over to the side of the road, got out of our truck, and it appeared to hover over us. The light on it seemed to be a triangular shape. We couldn't see the stars above because this object was so large. It stayed above us for a couple minutes. We could hear a very faint humming sound, and it appeared to be coming down above us. That was when we got back into the truck, and when we did, this object shot off very quickly. We knew at that point it could not have been an airplane or a helicopter. We actually thought at first it could have been a stealth bomber because of the way it could hover above us and the power it had to take off that quickly. But it seemed unlikely that it would follow us if it was military. So that appears to be the last sighting that occurred that night. And after that, the object disappeared from the sky. Well, that's about all the big show for this week. Thanks again to all the cast of performers in our little dramatization. That was fun. We got to do that again sometime. Goose from Here to Chew Bubblegum. Thank you so much, Goose. That was awesome, brother. Be sure to check out Here to Chew Bubblegum on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, everywhere. Great show. Thank you, Roger, a.k.a. Torben Wannabe, my oldest friend ever since 1986. Thank you, Brandon Fugit, my only begotten son. Thank you, Billy Bob Thornton, for creating the character of Carl Childers. Thank you, UFO Fred Richards, for the Hodag suggestion. And as always, thank you, Jimmy Pettinito, Mr. Haunted, for all the cool stuff you do for the show. We had an all-star cast this week. That was awesome. And there's another podcast I'd like to spotlight this week. A brand new podcast by my friend Deborah Jane East. It's called The Beacon Podcast. They're just putting out the first episode. I listened to it this morning and it's great. Very informative. It deals with all the madness that's going on in the world today with our tyrannical government and all that craziness. So be sure to check out the Beacon podcast. We're going to get all you guys on the show eventually. UFO Fred, Goose, Deborah. Just as soon as we can work our crazy schedules out. If you've got a true story and you'd like to be a guest on the show, or if you know a topic that you'd like to hear us discuss on the show, send an email to indarkplacespod@hotmail.com. We'll see you again here next week. God bless you guys.